Mr. Hockenberry. We've got tonight Al Hockenberry, and he is practicing, getting ready for Rocky Mountain Woodturning Symposium in September. So he wanted to do this suspended form for us. This is a very, very neat demo. So thanks, Al.
Well, what I'm going to do tonight is a demonstration on how to make what I call suspended spherical form. And this is probably a good example of a piece that it's got some carving, but this piece, the carving is very, very little. The whole profile of the tail is turned, okay? These edges here are turned, and then the rest of it is cut out in a bandsaw, and then you sand it, and it's a very little carving. Same with this piece, almost no carving at all. Everything's cut on the bandsaw. This piece has a lot of carving, but it's still simple carving. This was basically a vase shape or a goblet shape on this end, and then just cut on the bandsaw and shaped with simple carving tools. And I'm going to kind of go through well, this was a piece that I came up with. It's my original design. And, you know, it took me about 20 years of turning to do something that nobody else had done before, and that's it. But the way I got the idea was I was watching a guy at a AAW symposium, Soren Berger, and what he was doing was making these little scoops. And the way he made the scoop was he turned this piece, he had in chuck, he turns this almost perfect ball out here, okay? Now this ball, and then he's got the handle, the ball he can knock into a jam chuck, just a cup of wood with a hole in it, 2 inches, you knock it in there, and you got this handle spinning around. It goes around like that, and you hollow it out. And I was thinking, well, that's pretty cool. I wonder if you could make a scoop with 2 handles. And no, you can't knock it into a jam chuck like that, but you could cut slots in the side of the jam chuck and knock it in. Or if it were bigger, you could make it into, put it in a vacuum chuck maybe. I don't have a vacuum chuck that small. And then I said, well, if we can do that, we can make something a little bit larger. And instead of handles, you know, we got just chunks of wood out on either end. And then we can hold this in a vacuum chuck to hollow it out, because if we leave this big block of wood solid, it'll crack. And that, so that kind of led to these forms. So it's kind of by seeing other people do stuff and thinking about how you would do it and what you could do extra or different is kind of how I got there. So not being a creative person, it's really exciting when you create something. So now, what we also want to do with these pieces is maybe have them stand up a little bit. So one of the things, before I get too far away from it, on this piece, the ball's actually turned off center a little bit, so it sits up a little bit higher. So what I do, if I think about it, I'll make the blanks, you know, 1 inch longer in one direction than the other, and then offset it on the long side 1/2 inch so that the ball is in the top portion. And I'll show you how to do it on this one, and we'll do that. So what I want to do is have my center up here, and so I've already marked it there, and I'll have my, you know, 3-inch ball there. and it'll be up off the table a little bit. So I'll mark it over here. And what I'll do is just, I want to have a 3.5-inch ball. So what I'm doing is coming down 1 3/4, and I just add 1/8 for comfort. So I've got that line, and I'll just measure 2 inches from that side, and move over, and measure 2 inches from that side. And the center of that is the center of the piece. And by going 2 inches from either side and make the center, that's going to be a lot more accurate than trying to figure out how wide it is and divide by 2. So I put that center on. And I'm using a cup center on each end with a point in it. And I just like using those for small spindles, because if I ever decide I want to flip it around, it's easy to do. Or if I take the piece off and bring it back, it'll be easy to deal with. Okay, what I have here is a tiny piece of wood that's going to chip off, because I'm going to cut through here. What I'm going to do is just tape this part so that it doesn't hit anybody. If I was at home, I wouldn't worry about that. It's just going to, shoot off in the floor when I cut through it. But well, as soon as we cut through here, we can take off the tape. Okay, it spins. Turn the laser speed down, bring it up a little bit. It's going to be off center, so it might want to bounce a little bit, but so I'm going to use a bowl gouge, and I'm going to come in real slowly from each end and try to get the center part round. And on this particular one, what I'm going to do is leave that square on each end. That way, if I want to take the bandsaw, I've got that nice square end to rest against the bandsaw table and cut it out safely. Otherwise, I've got to make a sled and glue it in. So. And this is camphor that had in my shop for a couple of weeks. And camphor is just one of my favorite woods to turn. And it's a really nice wood to carve. And what I'm doing with this, I'm just using a side ground bowl gouge, making an entrance, and then just sliding across and trying not to get under the fibers too much, but I'm not worrying about it too much either. Now we're still not round, so. There you see I'm getting under the fibers. Now, as we get closer here, if you can see what I'm doing, I've got the tool here, I'm rolling it over, I'm cutting with that long wing, and this is a nice slicing cut that's coming across there. And that slicing cut is going to give me a nice, relatively smooth surface. Okay, one little flat here, so we'll get rid of that, coming back, and we'll see how big it is. One of the things when you do these forms, it's kind of, part of it's kind of predetermined that you've got to have, or I have to have, a sphere in the middle to hold in the vacuum chuck. And so it has to be bigger than my vacuum truck to fit in there, otherwise it'll suck down in the middle. So we're a little about 3 3/4. So we can take a little bit of wood off of there, but not much. So here's our chunk of wood that didn't hit you. Okay. Now, I want to find the center, and this piece is about 9 by 4 and something, so I'll make it at 4.5. My pencil point is broken. I put my spare pencil up here. So I want to see how big that is. These are my cheapy plastic calipers that okay, it's 96 millimeters. And I always work in the metric, it's easy. And so half of that is going to be 48. So I'll set these at 48. Now, typically what I do when I do this, if I'm going to have, usually what I do is I make my piece 3 times longer than it is going to be in diameter. And the reason that kind of gives a nice symmetry, you got about 1/3 of it's the ball, 1/3 of it is whatever you got on this side, and 1/3 of it's whatever you got on this side. There's nothing magic about it, it's just what I do. And when you do one, you can do I think those proportions work out nicely. Okay. So here's the edge of my ball, and I'm going to, if this is whatever that is, 3 inches in diameter, and this is 3 inches, then the sphere is going to sit in there. So I'm going to part down on either side and just kind of lay out the ends of this cylinder. Now, you notice over here, there's all kinds of fuzzy stuff on the edge of that cut. And there's a little trick you can do with a parting tool. If you hold it down and bring it into that cut, it usually will make a nice clean cut. So now we've got a cleaner cut there. You know, on this ball, maybe it doesn't matter, but it'll help me see where we're going here. Now, what I do for the ball is I'm going to turn this kind of a shape right here. And what this is kind of an 8-sided face, 6-sided figure, if you look at it in cross-section, 8-sided in cross-section rather, if we look at each end. And the idea is that if you get that, then there's a nice ball in there. So I'll just pass this around, and you can look at this ball may not be round, it's just one that happens to kind of fit in there. But if you do this, each of those flat surfaces will be, the center of that will be on the sphere. So it just kind of gets you kind of close to a sphere, and it's fairly simple. And the easiest way to get those, the diameter of that face is it's 40% of the diameter gives you that face, 41, but 40 is close enough. So if I've got 96, if we come out 20% on either side of the center line, we'll have 40, okay? So I've got 18 and 16, that's about 20. Okay, we rounded up because we rounded down to get there. So I come out 20 here, 20 millimeters. And I think these are millimeters, whatever these little guys are. And you don't have to know what they are. And, you know, I should, because I was the metrification officer for the National Cryptologic School when we changed to metric. And you know how well that went, right? All that did was make a lot of money for the people that sold gas meters. You know, and okay, so that is my 40%. I'm going to set my calipers to that distance, and you know, it took me about 45 years to learn that if you depress the spring on the calipers, this little wheel goes around a lot faster. Okay, so there we are. Now, we're going to part down and make this 40% 10 in diameter on each side. And when I cut one-handed with a parting tool, what I do is I put my forefinger right on top of the tool, and the tool's under my forearm, so I got a lot of support. And still have to make my relief cut. Okay. Oh, a little small. Okay. Now, with the porting tool, it's really important to make that relief cut, otherwise it'll bind on the tool. One time Sherry and I were teaching some kids spinning tops, and look around, parting tool is shooting across the room without a handle, like a throwing knife. And I go over and talk to this kid, 16-year-olds. I mean, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, great in the turning class, but as soon as they turn 14 and a half, they won't listen. Okay, so I go over and said, didn't you make the relief cut? And he says, no, I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't. So, it's like, experience is a great teacher, but that final exam. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I want to turn this flat face over here, but all this wood's going to be on the way, so I'm just going to get that wood out of my way. And this can, if you need this wood here because it's part of your design and your carving, then you just got to work more slowly and maybe use a spindle gouge to cut that face. The nicest thing about the Powermatic is the headstock slides. The bad thing about the Powermatic is the headstock slides. So we're not tight over there. Okay. What was happening was, as I was making my delicate cut here, we were slowing the work. It wasn't spinning as fast, so I was tightening the tailstock, and all that was doing was moving the headstock down to the other side. Okay, so I want to cut from that line down to my corner. And I try to just cut a straight line. And this tool, even though it's a bowl gouge, it's designed to cut a straight line. That flat bevel just wants to cut a straight line. The trick in turning is to make that flat into lots of little flats that are close to each other, and it begins to look like a curve. So what I'm doing right now is I look at the distance from my line to that corner and the distance from that corner to this corner. This appears to be a little bit larger. That tells me I have to take more wood off here. So as I make this next cut, I've got to change the angle so it takes more wood off here and less there. And they look pretty close to the same. So if I take off the same amount of wood going all the way down, we should make our face. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, more wood down there, less up here, so I want to make that get more wood as we go down. About the same. Okay. So now I want to mark the center of each of these faces. And I just kind of do that by eye. And then I mark halfway between this line in the corner, this line in the corner. And what we want to do is, I've shaded that in, we want to take that wood off. And also down here. So take off this wood. Now what we have to do is get this round enough so that it's going to grip in the vacuum chuck. So I'm going to take that corner off. Now, the next thing I'll do is just take off these other corners real quickly, just kind of by eye. Don't want to take off much wood, just want to nick the corners off. And now, I'm just going to, you can see it's beginning to look like a ball. Okay, it's a little football-ish shape, but it's getting to look like a ball. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn from here down to there and there down to there, kind of by eye, just trying to make that ball shape. I sort of have these training wheel lines on here to shoot for. Now we'll take out the cheating device. Okay. All this is a piece of PVC. It's kind of sharpened on here, and if I lay it on there, and if we could see over here. Oh. Okay. I don't know if you can see under here, but I can see light. Okay. And what's happening? So it's kind of close here. It's not too bad. There, it's right here. So I can tell I need to take wood off of right there. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to be using this right here. You can see we know that's high. So, but when that sits on there real tightly, will be good. And the whole goal is to get this vacuum chuck to fit on there real tightly. Right now, I can see big gaps, so it won't, if it leaks air, it won't hold. So we're just going to work on that shape a little bit more. And I don't want to go real slow here because we don't want to have to come back and try to put more wood back on here. Whoa. I'm always a little bit better at doing this side of the ball than the other, but so we'll kind of test to see how that's going to fit. Probably okay. Now I'm going to switch to a spindle gouge, and the reason is with the spindle gouge I can get a really nice surface that won't need too much sanding. And I'm also going to switch to a little shorter tool rest that'll let me get in a little closer here. And all I want to do is just shave off a little bit of wood until we get down here to the end. Then we'll take off a little bit more. And the idea is that going to be in your way? All we're trying to do is just take off the gouge marks. I'm going to check this. This part right here may want to push it out of the vacuum chuck just a little bit. Any part that's going to be down in the vacuum chuck has to be nice and round. Okay, I think that part's going to work. So this part should fit down in the vacuum chuck. Now what we want to do is work on the rest of these wings. Now here, you know, I would have pre-planned what I would do with the different profiles. I'm just going to make kind of a cove here, and I'm just going to use my spindle gouge, kind of make a nice clean cut in here and try to make a nice cove down there. Now you saw I was getting there where there's too much wood for my little spindle gouge to take off, so I just backed up and took that cut. Usually I don't want that cove to be too long. Come back here and clean this surface up just a little bit. And then we'll do the other surface. Now here it's real important not to be pushing so hard on that wood that the tool comes out and hits your ball. And I'm also kind of worried about these little corners. I work real close to there, but I don't jump in there. So when I move my hand ever so slightly, I could feel the corner. I just pulled back. I don't bang into there, okay? So now we've got this piece. So now we'll see if we can hollow this out. And one thing I didn't mention, it's perfectly okay to kind of think about some of these can be displayed vertically, and it works pretty nicely too. I've done a couple that way. So I need to take, well, I just need to take tailstock off. But then maybe if I complain enough, Rudy will jump over here and get rid of it. No, we don't need that. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and put this in my vacuum truck. And this is probably our infomercial here. Those of you who don't know Don Doyle, that's Don Doyle. He's been making these little vacuum trucks, which I think are marvelous. And one of the things we'll talk about the vacuum system, there's a vacuum pump, and we're going to pull a vacuum through the headstock. And I've got a little gizmo I'm going to clamp on here in a second, and we'll crank it up. These little drum chucks or vacuum chucks, I make a lot of them out of wood. I make quite a few out of PVC. Also make them out of sonotubes. That's the concrete form. It's a big piece of waxed cardboard. Now, a couple of things about those different chucks. The wood is totally inflexible. When you put a dense foam on there, you have a chuck that has to have a near perfectly round piece going into it, and it will hold very well, and it's very good for turning. If you put thick foam on there, it's spongy, and when you put the pressure of your tool on there, the wood moves, and then it begins to do this on you, and you get little funny stuff on your smooth surface. The sonotubes are real flexible in themselves, so if you have an old warped bowl that you want to put on the lathe for some reason, sonotube's great because it'll bend and accept that. It can't, it's not going to bend a whole lot, but it'll bend enough to take up some kind of out-around bowl and hold it very nicely. But it's going to not give you, it won't be good to turn because it's going to flex when you turn. The PVC actually bends just a little bit, but it's pretty sturdy. So this is and then this rubber stuff that Don's doing is really great. I love that. So we'll see if we can get this on here. Okay. Now on the other end, I have a little gizmo that fits on here. And then we'll tighten it on. And this turns, has a bearing in it, so it turns. Now, I've actually done vacuum systems using a shop vac. And if you just turn a little block of wood on here, put a little beeswax in it, stick it up there, turn the vacuum on, it'll work great. Awful noisy, yeah. Okay, so. Yeah, let's see, this one. Okay, now. Oh. I should say this. Another thing with the vacuum system, what you have is, I forget what this thing's called, but it's a valve and it's open to the atmosphere. So when it's open to the atmosphere and I put this here, it just sucks the rest of the world into there. But if we close it off, now the vacuum's got to come through here, okay? Now, one of the really cool things about these forms is you can put the whole, I think this is the one I just turned. Somebody was going to spot me. That I only need if this one won't stick in here, which it may not. Okay. The one thing,
Didn't you sand that ball before you put do this part of it?
I should have. If I had sanded it, it would fit better. Yeah. I should have sanded it. Good idea. Okay. Now, because see, that's part of it is right here. There's little tiny spaces where it's probably leaking air. One thing I do with these forms is I always put these on with a little bit of tape over the vacuum. And the reason is when I start to hollow, I'm going to be putting pressure on this, and what can happen is the vacuum, I might break the vacuum seal, and the piece probably won't come out of the vacuum. What it's going to do, though, is knock it off center. And when it's knocked off center, I got to either recenter it or my hole keeps getting bigger and bigger. And one thing, when you put this tape on, don't tape the first one hard because you'll pull it off center. One of the things I was talking to Don about is this chuck doesn't give me much taping space here in the back, but we'll work on that. Yeah. Now, one thing when you do these forms, the grain runs this way. If I make this wall right here real thin, this big lump of wood is going to pull right out. If you've done as many Christmas ornaments as I have, and you make these little thin caps and you push on the piece in the middle, it just breaks right through the cap, okay? So one thing I'm very conscious of is to kind of flare this out a little bit and not make that too thin. What is too thin? I really don't know. It depends on the wood, how fast you're spinning your lathe. And the one thing I do in the demos is I just put a little bit of tape there. And what that tape is for, in case I make this too thin, hopefully it'll keep this fairly close to the lathe instead of sending it through the back wall back there. I'm going to try and stay pretty thick here so we shouldn't have a problem. Now, I want to drill a hole in here for the depth. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a little tiny hole with my bowl gouge. And we'll just see. So I want to measure depth. Okay, so I have a drill bit with a Glenn Pluckelman handle. Actually, you know, Glenn owns more chucks than he does drill bits. So he doesn't own any chuck keys, but he okay. What I'm going to do is put tape here, and I'm going to drill to the tape. If I put the tape there, we should have a hole all the way through, or nearly. Okay, so I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is move the tape down about a 1/2 inch. Okay, so what that's going to do is when I get in there, I'm going to have a hole, or on the other side, we'll have about a little over 1/4 inch thickness in the wood. Now, I've got the tool rest so that it's a little low, so I can guide my drill bit in there. When it's in there, I can raise it up. It won't bind on the tool rest. And we'll see what happens here. Now we've got to keep pulling this out, because if I don't, what's going to happen is it's going to do this on me. Okay. Now, a long time ago, somebody told me, however you're holding a sphere, if you can drill it and it's still there, then you can probably turn it. And I found that to be true. If I've not pulled this out of the vacuum doing that, if I don't do anything real stupid while I'm turning it, we'll be okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set my opening to about an inch and a, let's make it about an inch, maybe inch and a quarter. What I'll do is just check that. About an inch and a quarter. My hollowing tools are the ones I brought using today are 3/4 of an inch shaft. Now, what I use here, this is a homemade backrest made out of plywood. This top surface is waxed, so it's got very little resistance. If I had a piece of that nice nylon tape, I should put it on there, but then I'd have to rip off a 1/16 of an inch to make it work. So someday, I actually have the tape, I've just never put it on there. I use Trent Bosch hollowing bars and the Jameson handle. Huh?
They're concerned that you have to have all this apparatus. You can do it with a regular gouge like you do a Christmas ornament. It's just a little harder.
Yeah, you could do it with basically any tool that you can hollow with. And I'm going to do something in a minute where you could actually do a takeoff on this with just a gouge. If you make the hole bigger, you can hollow the whole thing with a gouge. The only issue you have is whether you're going to hit any of these wings with your handle on this side. Okay, I'm going to come in and I'm going to move right to my hole, okay? What I'm trying to do is open up the space in there. Okay, what's happening is we're building up shavings in there. And I didn't have the heart to tell Rudy I needed a air compressor today. So actually, he called me this afternoon and asked if there was anything else we needed. We decided we don't need we don't need no air compressor. Yeah, what we're going to do, okay, now, we're down in there. Now, probably won't be able to go too much deeper without the air compressor or making an adjustment to the size of the opening. Now, what's really important when you're hollowing, oh, no, we don't. I have a straw. I just need somebody to puff on it. Are you volunteering, Tim? Now, what's happening now is, since we're pretty much going through the face grain, we're getting these nice long shavings, and they're going to pack in there. And what they like to do is make a little shaving ball. And they ride along the outside of the form. And what they do is they sneak around and they come up under your hollowing tool and they make it go up like that. And you have about an 1/18 of a second less than my reaction time to get my pinky out of there before it slams down on it. So what's going to happen is it's going to come up like that and smash my pinky. So when I start feeling the shavings, I get them out of there. Okay. Now, to do this hollowing, I'm going to need, I've done about as far over in here as I can with this tool. To get under the corner, I need a hook tool. Okay. So stick that in there. And the hook tools, these can all these tools can be used in a straight handle. And the one thing the hook tool does is this point should be kind of in line with the center of the shaft. Now, as I sharpen it, it gets shorter. So when I put a new tip in there, it kind of sticks out kind of on the left side of the shaft. And when it's all the way dull and hardly anything left, it's going to be way back on the other. So there's about, 2 sharpenings where it's in the center of the shaft. But it's close. And the idea is that if I'm like this and I push here, there's no torque because the tool doesn't know it's bent. So it acts just like the straight tool, supposedly. Now, one thing that's important is you want to be cutting where the tool's straight, okay? And what I'm looking for is my little marking gauge. So I have to make a new one. What I have here is an ordinary business card. I'm going to fold it in half. I'm going to put a reference mark on it. And I'm going to measure, let's say we're going to make our wall a 1/4 inch thick. Now I'm going to use a laser pointer, and I set all this stuff outside of my shop this morning when the sky was nice and blue, and it rained on it. So this thing is wood, and it still moves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be in the form right there cutting. So I'm going to be cutting on this side of the tool, so I'm going to put my mark right there. And as the laser gets real long on the wood, I don't know if we can, probably no place. Right here, is the oh yeah, it's white. When the laser looks real long like that, then it's starting to fall off, and that's right where I want to be for my wall thickness, okay? So, we'll start a little hollowing here. Okay, we're not at wall thickness yet. Just trying to get material out of the way. So what I come back and do is just make that first part there get that to thickness, and then just work my way around. Okay, there we're good. Okay. So that's the way I would do that nice thin wall going all the way around, okay? And what we're going to do now, in the interest of getting the chips out, we'll make a bigger hole for them to come through. I think this might work. Where'd our rim go?
It's over here, right behind that leg.
You can pass that around. Now, we've got now, if we had, here's one you can hollow with a gouge, okay? And what you've got is a little bowl, little suspended bowl. Now this is what I would be doing if we hadn't chopped the top off. We'd just be moving through that center hole, feeling for the bottom. Now we're pretty close to the bottom, but what I want to do is come in and finish this part down with the curve tool. Now, I'm getting down to where I'm going to be cutting straight off the tip of the tool. So I'm going to move that laser out here. Straight off the tip. Now what I try to do with this hook tool is go down about a little more than halfway and get an even wall thickness. And see, you really get some big shavings with that tool, so it's hard for those to come back out through a small opening, so it's a lot of air compressor time versus turning time. So hollowing is all about measuring, getting the chips out, and a little teeny tiny bit of hollowing. Now, imagine we can't see anywhere back in there with the laser, okay? So what I have is I've got a spot right here that's correct, and I've got the bottom of my drill hole, which is correct. So what I do is I bring the tool in here. What I'm eventually going to do, my last cut ought to be right from there, which was right, and I just swing the arc around to the bottom of my hole. Now, what that actually does is it makes this little part here becomes the fat part, but it's not too significant because you're not swiveling, you can't pivot. If you could pivot right from the center, then you'd have it, but you're actually pivoting out here a little bit. But it's really darn close, okay? And the laser's not doing anything for us now. So what I'm doing now is just kind of feeling for my center hole, my drill hole. Now we have to get the chips out. And I have somewhere a little tiny flashlight that lets me look down in the hole if we can't see in there. So we may be going to go right through the bottom here in a second. So try not to do that. Okay. Okay, so I think we're getting close here. Now, well, you know, I don't think.
You think we could take it to a regular check, Rudy?
Well, you know, you're absolutely right. And if you leave a little bit more wood out here, you just put a big plywood disc on there and a couple screws, and you're good. If you get it centered. Okay, so this is what it would look like if you had that little lid on the top. And so that's pretty much, now we should have sanded it before we took it off the lathe. Now, what I would do is go over to my bandsaw. I stand behind the bandsaw and I pull the piece towards me. I just feel it's safer to do that. And I would make that cut. Then I would make this cut. Now we've got a little bit of our fishtail. Then on the other side here, I cut through this way and take this piece off. And then I would cut that piece out. And somewhere along the line, this was dropped, or somebody, I think what somebody did was they just pulled the Velcro tab too hard. And one of the things that you'll encounter, if you try to do these little thin pieces here for feet, the grain is running this way, so it's very fragile. What I try to do when I'm doing these forms is I try to use a crotch piece where this crotch is beginning to divide. That way you've got the grain running that way and the grain running that way. So that's always, you know, if you can get a crotch, that's a good use for it. Plus, then you have some of the pretty wood from the crotch somewhere on the sphere, which is really nice. But we have, that's kind of the way I do these forms. And it's not, none of the turning is terribly difficult. It's very simple hollowing. The only little troublesome spot is the part of the sphere that's down in there. There's literally no way to measure it. If you just swing in an arc, you won't go wrong. So, yeah.
What tool do you use to shape the wing?
Oh, I use a lot of sandpaper for some of them. Mostly I'm using a Fordham and rotary tools. I use some carbide burrs initially, and it depends on how fragile the wood is. Some of them won't take a carbide burr. You put a carbide burr on there and you'll break the piece. So then I just go to small pieces. I also sometimes just take the little drum sanders, put them in a drill press, just take the piece over and just work on that real slowly. It goes pretty quickly. Or put that in a drill and go at it with a 80 grit sandpaper or something. If it's a nice, one of those nice long legs or something, it's much easier, probably easier to just shape it with sandpaper than, mechanical sandpaper, rather than try to use carving. Then on if it's a fishtail kind of thing, that's all sandpaper. If it's a leaf, now I've got to make the veins and everything with carving tools. And I use double cut, carbide cut, carving tips. Whatever Sherry will let me use. She buys them all and she says, you can use this one, I don't like it anymore. But don't use this one, that's my favorite. You'll just make it dull or lose it, So the carving's not, it's more scratching than carving for me. So. Okay. Well, thank you.